This talk is called Behind the Scenes and Up Front, and I'm not going to explain why. We've had two amazing talks, which are so down to earth and on the ground and of this country that I have to say I'm going home, and it's much more about home. Edmond and Corrigan's small architecture practice was formed in the 1970s, about the same time as the guillotine was being outlawed in France. No one's laughing. 50 years later, and 8 years after Peter Corrigan's death, it still continues. I brought patience and a steely determination to the practice. Corrigan, my partner in life and work, brought many of the work habits ingested from several years working in New York architecture offices. The long hours, working the town, notions of publicity, marketing, hero worship, and most importantly, no fear. At that time, Melbourne's architecture profession frowned upon such activities. Fueled by an influx of overseas academics, many practitioners taught part-time, public dialogues occurred between architects, and there was a surge in competitions, exhibitions, and architectural journalism. Architects were more and more in the public realm, and architecture gained currency as an idea rather than just a built work. Our Institute of Architects quaked as architects turned political and battlefronts formed to save buildings from destruction. Edmond and Corrigan were on the front line of this change, and we never looked back. In 1979, 4 Melbourne architects, a self-conceived and curated exhibition opened at the Powell Street Gallery in South Yarra. Together with Greg Burgess, here tonight, Peter Crone and Norman Day, not here tonight? No. We showcased our burgeoning practices. Dr. Kate Rhodes said of the exhibition that it played a formative role in the creation of an exhibiting and discursive culture in Melbourne that emerged through both the journal Transitions and the Halftime Club. There were no architects in my family. I was brought up surrounded by fashion, art, and iconic architecture. The greatest influence on my career was my mother. The parents met in Melbourne in 1939, just as war in Europe was about to break out. My father had left Vienna in 1938 and sailed from England on the P&O liner Aronsay to Wellington, New Zealand, the place on the globe that was furthest from Germany. He left behind both his family and his law career. Along the way, he disembarked in Melbourne. He met my mother at a dance in St Kilda, and the boat sailed away without him. His parents, who survived the war in Europe, followed in 1948, bringing with them their furniture and art collection, including a life-size salon portrait of my father and my grandmother. An embroidered sampler stitched by my grandmother in 1901 was another treasured possession that made the journey. My mother's ancestors settled in South Australia in the 1850s from Europe. She attended University High School and the Melbourne Technical College. At the time my parents met, she was working for the Argus newspaper as a commercial artist and fashion illustrator. After the war, they opened a fashion house in Flinders Lane called Linda Patricia, joining the post-war bustle of the rag trade. Mother was the in-house designer, while father worked as the office manager, accountant, and salesman. Their showroom and design studio were located on the second floor of Mallorca House. The workroom which accommodated the cutters, the machinists and finishers, was half a block away in Collins Street, on the first floor of the block building, above the block arcade. During school holidays, I was a child of the city, running errands around the traps, getting to know the arcades, department stores, cinemas, theatres and cafes, all clustered into the great wide streets of Swanston, Burke and Collins, with the laneways in between. Every building and warehouse in Flinders Lane seemed to house accessory shops selling fabrics, linings, buttons and zips, belts and beads. I recall my mother's hectic work ethic to design 4 separate fashion ranges every year, one for each of the seasons. Her studio space was littered with sketches, hung paper patterns, rolls of fabric, piles of swatches, and Cravenet cigarette butts. There were such strong parallels here with the way we worked in the architectural practice. Fashion parades were highlights of the social calendar in Melbourne. Linda Patricia's first parade took place in the Venetian room of the Australia Hotel. 7 mannequins modelled 35 garments, a typical garment being described as ballerina frock in striped moire English taffeta, 5 shades in 3 sizes. Price £8, 10 shillings. These parades were fundraisers for charity, complete with well-known comperes, musical accompaniment and fashion journalists. Mother was awarded a life governorship of the Royal Women's Hospital. Father's only claim to fame was as a judge of the Melbourne Cup Fashions in the Field. We originally lived in Quamby, a small apartment building in a Toorak cul-de-sac. It was designed in 1937 by architect Roy Grounds and located on top of a hill overlooking the Yarra River. Eventually, the noxious odours from the Richmond abattoir on the other side of the river drove us away, and for several years, home was a rented maisonette, also in a cul-de-sac, but next to a railway line in the suburb of Brighton. Throughout this time, my parents sought to purchase a modern family house. The outlying bayside suburbs of Blackrock and Beaumaris had become a destination for this new contemporary architectural style, which utilised space and light in an open manner, together with a sparse and simple palette of form and materials. It was there that they purchased the Bridgeford House, designed by architect Robin Boyd in 1953. Situated opposite Half Moon Bay at Blackrock, it nestled quietly on a corner, surrounded by a high brick wall and camouflaged by a dense native landscape. Living in the wonderful Boyd House defined my future understanding of space, light, and architectural detail. In 1960, after playing in a hockey clinic in Royal Park, I had a chance encounter with a group of architecture students at the Melbourne Zoo, who were spending an afternoon doing a design esquisse on animal enclosures. After drawing lots of lions and elephants on their sketches, I took away the notion of a world of architectural education at Melbourne University. The parents had wanted me to join the firm, but the lure had worked, and I commenced a bachelor degree in 1964. At that time, the architecture school was housed in corrugated iron Nissan army huts, complete with kainite walls and ceilings, absolutely ideal for pin-ups and graffiti. Whilst at university, I continued to engage with fashion and would wear my designs to lectures. I once wore a homemade tunic-style sizelation outfit, very warm in winter, cool in summer, but very uncomfortable to sit in. I also created a range of handmade men's ties, which were sold to city boutiques and fellow architecture students. Theatre design was also on the agenda, with costumes designed for student theatre productions, including 3 Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. It was fashion that provided the link to a life in the architecture practice with Corrigan. We had met in 1966 when I was a third-year student and collaborated on a university fashion parade. Corrigan had completed his bachelor degree in architecture following an earlier stint with a commerce degree. He was working for a prominent architect, at the same time designing sets and costumes for local theatre companies and the occasional wedding dress, Jeremy, wedding dresses? For his friends' brides. A master's degree at Yale University was looming. So it wasn't until several years later, after I had graduated, married another architect, had 2 children, and started my own architecture practice, that we started to work together. Our rough and tumble top-floor city office space in Little La Trobe Street was soon followed by a double-height space in a new 3-story building in the same street. We opened the new office in 1986 with a tribal rug gallery, tribal rug exhibition and party. 6-metre-long kilns hung from the ceiling, collected by a good friend in the days when Baghdad was accessible. Musicians played from the balcony space above, which became my office, where I could survey everyone, including Corrigan. Once again, I was immersed in a busy city laneway, mimicking Flinders Lane, with its cornucopia of small businesses, only these were printers, surfboard makers, dance studios, and motorbike repair shops. Over the years, we became influencers through the work, the teaching, the publications, the awards, and an intense engagement with theatrical and artistic culture. Early commissions for religious architecture were followed by schools, fire stations, childcare centres, tertiary buildings, community centres, office buildings, and a multitude of residential work. By the 1990s, Melbourne women architects had their feet on the ground and have continued to make significant contributions to the built environment since then. I had been appointed in 1983 to the Zoological Board by Evan Walker, an architect and government minister. How ironic that this venue had provided such a pivotal moment in my life. The way the Zoo Board selected architects for their projects was completely turned around by me for the better, and the board continued to appoint a succession of women architects to the same position over the next few years. Another appointment was as a council member and Deputy Chancellor of Deakin University, where I also chaired the campus planning committee for several years. The 19th century French artist Eugène Delacroix once said, "A drawing is my daily prayer." I live by that one. Art has permeated my life from the time when I scribbled every night as a child on the duck egg blue walls of my bedroom. Some early works include a 1960s winning entry in a United Nations art competition, Year 12 artwork, sculptures done at an RMIT sculpture workshop, and sketches done during a whirlwind tour of France and England soon after. Our own art collection includes works by my late uncle, Arthur Thomas Challen, who studied at the National Gallery School in the 1930s and had his first solo exhibition in 1937 at the Hogan Gallery in Little Collins Street. A number of his works are held in the State Library collection and include a much treasured portrait of Moira Madden. 3 of his studio sculptures evoke the traditions of sculptural language. The female plaster torso sits on a shelf in my bedroom. The female plaster nude sits on a pedestal in the relax room, and the bronze anatomical figure sits in the garden so as not to frighten the grandchildren. Mother's fashion drawings also hang on the walls. Her garment and design collection resides in the Victorian National Gallery. But the artwork that resonates the most sits in my office, a commissioned work by Corrigan to immortalise the word Maggie in barbed wire. The Edmond and Corrigan Architecture Archive now resides in the RMIT University Design Archives, and Corrigan's Theatre Design Archive is housed in the Victorian Performing Arts Museum. So there's nothing much left. It's all gone. Highlights for Edmond and Corrigan have been the 3 honorary doctorates from the University of Melbourne and RMIT University. The Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal, awarded in 2 halves, in 2003 and 2023, 2 memberships of the Order of Australia, 4 published books, and for Corrigan, a visiting professorship at Harvard University and a full professorship at RMIT University. Away from the office, the family grew to 3 children, their partners, and 6 grandchildren. Last year, the Victorian chapter of the Institute of Architects gave my name to their annual Enduring Architecture Award. When I first heard this, I thought I had won an Enduring Architect Award. I would like to finish with a recent work of non-architecture, a folding screen designed to give privacy for a close friend whose bedroom in her retirement home looks out onto a public roadway. My proposition for the future of architecture, especially in residential design, is that we build hope into domestic designs to provide spaces for healing and respite, away from the dictatorial and sterile world of screens and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie, for the nice talk.
Thank you,
What do you see architects nowadays doing that you consider that they are missing the point of what architecture should be? Are there things that you consider mistake?
I have to.
We are among friends.
To our previous speakers because they are right on the money. I don't think it's missing the point. I think there are enormous pressures and trials that officers have to deal with. I think we should celebrate every built work. We certainly celebrate the planning permits in this town.
Well, what do you consider values that have to be, and maybe that link to the end of your talk, that have to be in a good architectural project?
Say again?
What do you consider that are the values that have to be in a good project?
They have to reflect that they are about the people who use the buildings. They have to talk to what is around them. They have to give that hope. I'm a great fan of the Maggie Centres as well, which have been, it's rather like Nonda's way of procuring buildings. They came from Maggie Jenks, who was a landscape architect, who had suffered cancer and was appalled while she was suffering cancer at how demoralising the treatment and the surroundings were. Her husband Charles started the foundation where so many significant architects have contributed pro bono to do these wonderful buildings in oncology centres. And they do have the hope. If that hope can come into a lot of residential work, which tends to be repetitive, and although it's it's ticking all the boxes of sustainability and the surfaces and the services and even our passive houses. I mean, they're wonderful, but sometimes the joy is missing out of them.
Philip Goat said of you about how are you as an architect, that you are utterly professional, pinpoint perceptive, and stubbornly steely. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Which attributes do you consider needed, so really needed, in order to make it happen? You say that we need to celebrate the permits. Which attributes do you consider for an architect do you consider important in order to make it happen?
I would put a respect for a few things that are around, a respect for the community, a respect for the clients, a respect for humanity, respect for, and this is where the down-to-earth comes into it, respect for what has come before and what is under our feet.
Regarding respect, you say that the AIA Gold Medal resonated with you as a Nobel Peace Prize. What do you mean by that? What was the meaning of this award for you?
Well, you spell noble, N-O-B-L-E.
Sorry, I didn't catch the
as opposed to N-O-B-E-L. Right? And peace, you spell P-I-E-C-E instead of P-E-A. I wrote that speech very quickly. It was one that came off the top of my head.
Within the last 10 years, you have experienced many changes, many changes. And the gold medal also brought hectic into your schedule lately. How have been these years professionally for you? You have seen there were many things happening, but how were those?
It's been a reawakening, Fermin, when your practice is wound down, when all the work has been put into an archive, and along comes the gold medal. It's reactivated me again. It's like I'm back working at the coalface.
Let's do this again.
So that's been the principal change.
And how does someone keeps up to date of decades of profession? Because that's also challenging.
Oh, we have a very active institute in this country who keep us up to date. And
that's good. That's true. Yeah, for me, that will be for now all.
Thank you.
We're very honored to have you on the stage, and we are going to still have you on the stage in a minute during the roundtable discussion. But for now, Maggie, thank you a lot for your wonderful talk.